All right, so I have here a discussion of CPRs in practice, although one might define these as something different from than CPRs, although later on we will get to some more clear examples of CPRs. So the first part of this lecture, whatever discussion material, comes from a book from a friend of mine. He's a professor at the University of Toronto, Marcelo Vieta. He is half Argentinian, or he's actually fully Argentinian. I guess he's a Canadian citizen as well, with Italian roots. So I guess he's everywhere in the world. And it's a book called Worker Self-Management in Argentina, Recuperating Autonomy, and I forget the rest of the subtitle. Anyway, the book covers this really interesting phenomenon in Argentina of empresas recuperadas por sus trabajadores. You don't have to remember that, it's not on the exam. Ah, okay, she's okay. So I'll wait a moment. We are getting another member in. Wait till she arrives. Okay. Ania, okay, she's here. So then I will start. This is the first slide, so you didn't miss anything. I was introducing the empresas recuperadas por sus trabajadores. And I'm saying you don't have to remember that it's not on the exam. Or ERTs for short. And that means just recovered enterprise or enterprises or firms recovered by their workers. So Marcello comments that Argentina has the largest movement in the world of worker-led conversions of capitalist businesses into cooperatives. There are currently 400 in existence. Of course, there have been more over time. Some of them have stopped existing. But that is quite an impressive figure, quite an impressive number of individual cases. And one speaks of a movement already, although some of the individuals involved say there are several movements. So it's a very diverse collection that also is in a number of distinct fields and sectors. So from labor intensive to more capital intensive industries. And we'll cover some of these case studies. So he starts with a conjunctural approach and situates these ERTs in the larger labor struggle resulting from Argentina's modern economic crisis. I'm sure most of you have heard about the debt default in 2001 and the problems that preceded that and continued into the present. So won't cover all of that here, but he does a very good overview in the book. So if you're interested in that, you can always check out those chapters. There are two types of ERT. He says one of them is the class struggle type and the other is the negotiated type. As you imagine, one of them is more conflict laden than the other one. And the negotiated type is more associated with the Italian experience. There's a law in Italy called the Legge Marcora, or the Marcora law, which was instituted in the 1970s, which allows for employees of struggling firms, or really any firm, but it's mostly applied in struggling firms, to purchase the firm with state assistance, with grants, with loans as well. So there have been a number of dozens and dozens, maybe I think it's actually in the hundreds in Italy of these conversions, these negotiated conversions. And there are about two of them every month in Italy. And back to Argentina, particularly in the class struggle ERTs, ties of solidarity, as Marcello observes, are developed through the shared experiences that are forged by a common fate of precariousness. What does that mean? Well, in fact, many of these members, define themselves as a class or experience themselves as a class merely to the fact that they are all suffering a very similar fate in the workplace, particularly. So this is a quote: at the same time that ERTs were resisting neoliberalism, people also began to co-create community-based solutions that look beyond the mediation of competitive markets, austerity, and cumbersome state or union bureaucracies. And in fact, many of the co-op members initially were unaware of cooperatives. They had no idea what a cooperative is, but they adapted or adopted it actually for the sake of convenience, that it just was very useful for occupying the firm. And later, of course, they identified themselves more actively as cooperative activistas, so people who, were associated with cooperatives, then later really took on this mantle and found that to be something that identified them. So, okay. Yeah. I thought we were missing a slide. So this is the first case study I wanted to cover. It's the Chilaver Artes Gráficas. It's a print shop in Nueva Pompeya in Buenos Aires. And it was recovered in 2002. And Marcello, he has a very sort of literary style of writing. He says, perhaps the workers of Chilavert are a band of mutinous ex-servants who have now found freedom from the repression and exploitation of the former caudillo proprietor they once worked for. So basically, the former owner, again, situating this in this crisis of Argentina, currency crisis, debt crisis, and so on. The former owner failed to pay workers for months at a time, and some were owed more than $30,000 in wages. So in fact, in many of these ERT examples, the workers were the largest creditors of the owners through the back pay that was still owed. And this was accompanied by this notion of vaciamiento, which means basically that the owner started asset stripping, selling off machines and tools and various capital stock while there was insolvency or bankruptcy proceedings going on, which is illegal. But it's a very common practice in Argentina where the courts and the police often turn a blind eye or are even bribed to to ignore these practices. So on the 4th of April 2002, the workers actively occupied this shop and physically blocked the machinery from being removed, and started basically illegally working the company again. And the first publication of this syndicate was actually delivered through a hole in the wall because they were barricaded by the police, even by certain sectors of they had the sort of the riot police and others. And there's a very interesting story about how the neighborhood actually came together to support these workers. So their first publication was delivered through a hole in the wall because they couldn't get it out the front door. And they were actually vital in founding the Red Gráficas, which is a sort of a network or a second-tier printing co-op where there are 20 or 30 of these different co-ops that are involved. I have to say the printing co-ops of art, or the printing business in Argentina is known for its radical sort of political history. So they're very active in political struggles and conflicts and so on. So here I wanted to show you a short video. Oh, what have I done? Can you? Yes.
The Hotel Ballin has 22 floors and 180 rooms. What makes this hotel interesting is that it's worker
Can everyone hear?
operated. The Hotel Ballin attracts
But it's quite hard. Can you turn it louder?
Wait a minute. I think the problem is that it is channeling the audio through my speakers and not through, how do I do this?
I have to share with audio, I think.
This is all very difficult. Is there a, share computer sound. Here we go, I found it. I hope this works. That was it. So please nod or give me a thumbs up if it works. Yes?
The Hotel Ballin has 22 floors and 180 rooms. What makes this hotel interesting is that it's worker-owned and operated. The Hotel Ballin attracts international tourists who can mix with artists, intellectuals, and activists interested in workers' rights.
Es una gestión independiente, está administrado por sus propios trabajadores y esto nació como una respuesta a la crisis del desempleo y a la crisis económica que se generó en el año 2001, que se ha logrado combinar el funcionamiento de una empresa muy seria, pero no tradicional, y administrada con un criterio básicamente social y de responsabilidad hacia la sociedad.
Right now I'm in a double room. It has all the modern amenities, including built-in radio, cable TV. It's very clean and compact. All the rooms here have air conditioning, which is important in Buenos Aires in the summer. This room has a great view of some old Buenos Aires architecture.
Pero también redistribuimos riqueza, y eso es la cooperativa. Acá no hay empleados, sino que hay asociados.
There's also a bookstore and a cafe open to the public. The cafe is a real meeting point for people from all over Buenos Aires. Mirror-covered piano bar. Lounge is a funky place to have a drink, and sometimes there's live music. The piano bar is open every night, and it's just another way that the general public can enjoy Hotel Bowen.
Debaten y uno puede cruzarse con un turista internacional que solo vino por la buena ubicación del hotel o por las comodidades del hotel, pero también pudo juntarse con un sector de trabajadores o un sector social que necesitó hacer una reunión en un espacio de este hotel y que hizo un evento, y eso convive perfectamente y le da una cultura y una identidad propia a esta empresa recuperada que es la cooperativa del Hotel Bowen.
I'm Andy Wanderer showing you Buenos Aires.
So, I've actually visited the Hotel Bowen. It's very popular. Oh, it was very popular. I have to say, it is actually no longer in existence. It actually was a victim of the pandemic, and for many, many years they have been very successfully, continuing to survive in a very adverse climate, despite court injunctions and really very brutal tactics to get them out. I could tell the story. It's a very fascinating one. It probably takes too long. Basically, it was a very similar situation to Chilavert, where the owner was basically using the building to strip the assets, and he even got a lot of tax credits to build the hotel for the Olympics in Argentina, I think in 1976 or something like that. And so yeah, basically the workers took over, but they were not able to, persevere in the pandemic and the absolute, fallout from, the lack of tourism. And, it's a hotel, it's a very large hotel. And so it does no longer exist, but they were actually very popular and even had support from people like Bernie Sanders and others. So that was, I guess now it's history. Next is the Unión Solidaria de Trabajadoras. It's a solid waste treatment cooperative, or even in a sense a union, which originally was part of a multinational called Techint, which actually was trying to get out of the waste management business, and basically was attempting to force its workers out. And they proceeded to struggle in a very valiant way, in a very interesting way, in a very creative way against this. It included occupations and other things. So it says here, it was basically a process of self-education. According to Barrios, who is the leader of UST, and other workers whom Marcello had spoken with, it was this intellectual preparation, their skills upgrading, and their adroit self-organization early on in their struggle to save their jobs that made a major difference in their future conversion into a cooperative. So basically, as I said, they engaged in a lot of subversive activity. Piqueteros, which are people who close or block the streets. Some of you might have encountered this before. And occupations. They basically occupied the workplace that they were being evicted from, and simultaneously appealed to the Ministry of Labor, who in a sense supported them, but they did not enforce these rules in many cases. So despite the official support, they still required very strong tactics actually in order to persevere. So in 2003, in July, they started a cooperative, and in a bid actually for the contract that the prior company had given up. And via both continuing occupation and appeal to the labor ministry, they did receive that contract and are still in existence today. Very interesting case as well. Then there's the Trabajo de Salud Junín, which is in Cordoba, I guess the second biggest city in Argentina. And it's a healthcare cooperative, which is a very interesting thing. And I just have this quote here: the medical specialties of the clinic are pediatric care, oncology, ophthalmology, cardiology, internal medicine, hematology, neurology, dentistry, urology, immunology, dermatology. And then Marcello says this is more of a hospital than a clinic. So it's a quite extensive set of services that they offer as a cooperative. And basically, this was the result of the neoliberal reforms after 2001 and the closure of provincial health clinics, which left a lot of people without the necessary services in terms of healthcare. And in fact, in this clinic, there was another case of asset stripping where basically the original owner was selling all of the machinery, firing large parts of the workforce, and leaving basically a shell of a clinic. So after multiple changes of ownership and unpaid wages, in 2002 in May, the remaining workers basically began occupying, and on the 13th of June, they operated and opened as a collective. And Marcello says here, in a sense, then the Junín workers fell into the occupation of the clinic, that they didn't plan this and gradually warmed to the idea of self-managing it. So again, it was an experiential thing. Rather than pre-planning their direct action, the Junín workers would learn gradually how to occupy a firm in trouble and resist eviction from the situation at hand. Of course, they had a lot of help with lawyers and unions helping them. And it took many years, but in 2009, they were actually officially recognized. And Marcello sent me this the other day when he heard I was teaching this workshop. And this is a class that he was teaching actually last year during the pandemic. And basically, this is a site they created for the course that was in response to the pandemic as the course was pushed online. And so there was some interesting, this was basically a result of the course itself, where students posted their projects and their essays and so on. So I mean, just trying to give you some inspiration for the projects that we're supposed to do, or that you're supposed to do for this course. This would be another example, starting a website, something like that. It's another example. So, how do I do this? So yeah, I think I'll switch over quickly, and then I had two texts that I thought we could discuss as a group. Yes, so sure, I was thinking maybe if we should stop and read the first text and then move on, but I think this is better. The second sort of case study set of ERTs that I thought we could discuss are things like the Cooperative Poly and others, which fall under the domain of data commons. So we talked about the ERTs from Eleanor Ostrom, and we talked about these double movements from Polanyi. And in fact, this is a good example of both, because as you see today, data, whether metadata or personal information or whatever it is has an increasing value in the digital economy. And there's this essay by Trevor Scholz and a co-author discussing the so-called data divide, and also using the term data colonization, meaning that some people or groups actually have more sovereignty over their data than others, depending on the social class, the ethnic group, the level of information, and other things, and knowledge. So they propose as a solution community ownership of data, which again should remind you of these CPRs. So it's not just water or grazing fields that you can organize, or irrigation canals, but also data, community ownership of data. So they have some examples, including the city of Barcelona, which has its new city plan that, for instance, I mean, they have a lot of policies. It's a very long-term strategy, but of requiring companies like Uber and Airbnb to actually share the data that they accumulate on their drivers and tenants and others with the city. And in fact, both companies responded by withdrawing from the market, but in the end, they found actually that the market was important to them, and they returned under the conditions that Barcelona stipulated. So it's, for me, an example that shows that actually even municipalities can get on the better side, or on the better end of the relationship with these large basically monopolies, and you don't have to accept their terms. Of course, not every municipality has this power. Barcelona is not a small town. It's a very popular tourist destination, so they are in a very privileged position. But somebody has to start the ball rolling, and it's very encouraging to see, their own experiences and how that can actually help other cities think about similar strategies. Also, the example of Poli Poli, which is claims to be Europe's first data cooperative, seeks to organize data. Anyhow, we can discuss Poli Poli and so on in the discussion round, but just to say it is organized as a ESC, which is a European social cooperative, which is rather a new legal form, defining a cooperative that deals across European borders. So yeah, there are not many of those, but it's an increasingly used legal form. And it also has a dual structure similar to Wikipedia or Wikimedia, which is basically run as a charity and has a for-profit sort of arm that is able then to deal with businesses and licensing and so on. But the main assets that Wikipedia has are owned by this charity. So they are organized in a similar way, except that the main assets are owned by the cooperative. The data is owned by the cooperative, and then there's another firm that is able then to license certain things to companies. So that's it.